Welcome to the Communicate Great podcast. I am your host, Tracy Poe, and we have an amazing guest with us, Meg. Thank you so much for coming on. I met you very recently, and when I saw the name of your company, I immediately knew we had to talk. So I would love for you just to introduce yourself to the audience, let them know what your company name is, all of that stuff, what it does, and then we'll proceed with some other questions.
All right, sounds good. Yeah. So I'm Meg. I am the founder and speaker at Dating Tips by Meg, which is a nonprofit agency that we speak to high schools and college age girls and raise awareness on the early signs of dating abuse and helpful hints about digital stalking and digital privacy. Uh, yeah, so I try to raise awareness throughout all different age spectrums. But when it comes down to are you targeting, usually it's high school and college girls, and then women's groups. That
Yes,
just affects so many people. So yeah, it's always there's always an open audience, that can hear the information.
absolutely. I really find what you do so needed. When I first saw the name Dating Tips by Meg, I thought, because I do a lot on the love languages and that kind of thing, how to communicate with all of the people in your life. And
Right.
so I thought, oh, this will be great. But then when I read and found out what you really did, I was like, no, yeah, we have to talk because I know people. I mean, I think the truth is, anybody who's listening can honestly say they know at least one person who has had really unhealthy, even if not a relationship, just somebody who was intrigued by them and you never had a relationship. I remember when I was working on my bachelor's degree and I was walking from building to building and I heard some rustle in the bushes and it scared me. And so I kind of got into the next building, and one of my male friends was there, and I was like, "Okay, something is out there." And he went out, and it was a guy who was following me in the bushes.
Ooh,
And
scary.
so that was such a long time ago, way before all of the digital stuff and the social media. And I mean, think about it. So now people have a way to stalk you and torment you physically as well as virtually. And so it's like double whammy for this really toxic, unhealthy, and sometimes very dangerous behavior. So I thank you for what you do. So I'm just curious, why? Why did you get into doing what you're doing?
Well, I have to say, unfortunately, it was from personal experience. I was getting divorced in 2013 and met a guy, actually worked for him, and decided to start dating. And within 6 months, there was a physical altercation. And at that point in time, he revealed that he had put cameras in my cars. He was tracking me through GPS. He had hacked into my social media, and there was spyware on my phone. And that all came about one evening. And from there, of course, with the physical altercation, I said, "Oh, this definitely isn't right." And so I was trying to get out. It took over a year to kind of get like physically away from him, but then he continued to stalk me for 7 years after that. And he would use digital means, hitting cameras in your homes, uh, hacking your phone, hacking your computer, just spying on you all the time. So I have felt like I had no privacy. And then the other thing is the digital things. People think it's so hard or tech savvy you have to be in order to use this, this stalking ware. But the truth is, it's too easy for people to use it. And so after everything settled down, I thought I'd go back to a normal, corporate job, marketing, conferencing, sales. And I can't walk away from it and say, let other people go through what I'm going through. I had so much knowledge and had learned so much that could help people and help prevent stalking, prevent dating abuse from happening just by knowing very few things, and even just knowing yourself enough to like recognize your body's telling you something. And so I started sharing my story with people, and people were very opening and welcoming to it. And then I would usually hear someone else's story right back to mine. Usually the 1 out of 3 people are affected by violence and stalking. And so it just kind of caught on, and I figure I can reach a lot of more people if I share my story, share the early signs of dating abuse, give people helpful tips if they're going through something and how to get help. So yeah.
Wow. I was just saying this. I was just at a conference a few days ago. Well, no, yesterday. It was yesterday, and it was called the Girl Cave Summit, and it was for women in business. And they had an amazing speaker there. And I hope I'm getting her name right. I think her name was Judge Audrey Moorhead. I hope I'm right. And if I'm wrong, I'll correct that. But anyhow, she was talking about that gut feeling,
Mhm.
and listening to that gut feeling, and it's there for a reason. So it's just true. So I was after the conference, I was writing with somebody and I was telling her about a situation of a retreat that I'd gone to years ago. It was a women's retreat, Christian. And we had a speaker and she was talking about how to hear the voice of God. And it was, you could be hearing the world's voice, the enemy's voice, your voice, God's voice. How do you know who you're listening to?
Right.
And so she had had the experience, and this is why she wrote the Bible study. She was sitting at a stoplight and she heard back up. And she was like, back up, right? And so, like, if I'm telling it right, 3 times she had that internal message to back up, and she didn't back up. Somebody ran a red light,
Oh,
hit a different car, and somehow they ended up hitting her. And if she would have backed her car up, she would not have been in that collision. And
oh,
so it's just an example of how when we have that gut saying something, do something, don't do something,
right.
man, we've got to take heed. It's there for a reason. It's our protection. So I'm just curious, and this is something that I've thought about. You see movies and all this stuff with the cameras, and you just think that's a spy thing. But no, it's real life.
Yes.
So, how did you go about discovering where the cameras were, where the tracking, whatever, all of your car, your phone, I know you said it came out, but how did you actually find it to get rid of it?
Well, that was probably the most frustrating part of that, is because I didn't know for like the 6 months while we were dating, because a lot of all those things I described before began while we were still dating. So I mean, we were together almost constantly, and still he felt the need to use spyware and use hidden cameras and use those kind of things. And so I wasn't aware that these things existed until that altercation that night, and the fact that he could tell me that the phone, he had read a message before I even knew a message existed. And he'd done the same thing with my social media at one point in time. He said, who is this person, why are they contacting you? And I didn't, I honestly had no clue, because he hated me being on my cell phone, because it was always like, who are you talking to? What's going on? Who are you, who are you flirting with? And so a lot of it came about. I knew that there existed because of what he said,
Got
what
it.
he saw. And so locating him now has become a lot easier. But at that point in time, there was one in the house that was so small, it looked like a Christmas light, like one of those tiny little white light things, and it was just the tip of it I could see, but it was just glowing enough, and it had a reflection enough on it that I was like, oh, there's one of the cameras. Uh, but yeah, I mean, even in our home, there were 6 cameras between the outside and inside, and of course there were some that he didn't expose or I didn't know about until afterwards. Just because he's
Wow.
revealed footage and different things like that were like, oh, I know what angle that camera was at. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. One of the things that kind of irked me when maybe Apple came out with the tag, do you know what I'm talking
Oh
about?
yeah, yeah, the air tags.
Why? Why
Yeah,
is it? I mean, supposedly they're for a great reason, but no.
yeah.
I
It's
mean, you make something like that available?
yeah, and it's
Wow.
just they're so small and inconspicuous. Like someone could put one in your jacket pocket. They can put it under your car. They can get it under your car. I mean,
I see.
it's so small that yeah, it's hard to detect and hard to find. These things are always like kind of hidden, and then you can add like black tape in front of the little blinking light, so you don't see the blinking light. So it makes it even less obvious that way as well to find it. So yeah, it's
Wow.
just like stalkerware. The stuff they put on phones and laptops. It buries itself. It gets inconspicuous. It's meant to be hidden, and so it doesn't even stand out like, hey, here I am. Take me off of your device. It's buried deep down there, so that it's almost impossible to take off. But I have figured out finally the way to alleviate, if
Good.
you've got a phone with spyware, how you can
Oh
try to
my
reset it
goodness.
and get rid of it.
I'm
Yeah,
so, so, so glad that you are on. So, what I would like, well, we're not done yet, but what I would love is for people, would you be okay with if people feel like this is happening to them, for them to reach out to you so that you
definitely.
can help them?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, do consults all the time. I have actually had someone on Saturday morning going through divorce, and she's like, he just knows too much, and he knows messages that I was only sitting between me and my mom, and so I know my mom didn't share them with him, so how is he getting to those? And so, yeah, we're gonna go do the process. I'm like, it always is on the victim almost all the time, the burden, staying safe, moving, getting a new car, getting new phones, those kind of things. Unfortunately, it feels like, why am I being punished for this?
Right.
But when you think, okay, I'd rather know that I'm safe or know that there's no one spying on me now through this device, at least, it's worth the trouble. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, because we're Communicate Great and we talk about ways to level up your communication and we give people tips and tricks, right,
Right.
to help them with their communication, what really good advice do you have around your topic? I really want to hear this.
Well, first I would say is know yourself and know how things that make you uncomfortable. Know yourself, know your body, because when you get in these relationships, the biggest thing that you kind of ignore or don't take note of is the messages you're getting from like the things in your head saying that's not right, or your stomach getting all upset every time this person yells or scream. Know yourself enough to know, like, this is a warning sign. It's not
Yeah.
that I have a tummy ache tonight. It's not that I'm just sweating because I'm sweating, I'm nervous. It's because my body's trying to tell me something. And
Yeah.
so from that part, and then just knowing what your boundaries are. What are you willing to put up with? What are you not willing to put up with? What makes you feel anxious? Because when you are able to know yourself well enough and then communicate that. So
Mhm.
people can't read your minds. So I say, everyone's like, this is a difficult conversation to have. It's not difficult if you're open and honest, and just if you're with the right partner, it'll feel all right. And in the return you're asking for them their boundaries. What's uncomfortable for them, or what makes them feel good about themselves. All these different things. And then if of course you have these boundaries and someone disrespects them continually, or you can't talk about things openly, it's always a one-sided discussion. uh,
Yes.
those kind of things you want to be take note of, because those are unhealthy communication or no communication, and it leads to a toxic relationship. So uh,
Yes.
yeah, you just don't, just like this person that's just being controlled and manipulated by somebody, and you don't have any say so in the relationship, so it's not healthy. um but you can, if you see something that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's not a red flag but a yellow flag, it's time to just have that open communication with somebody. But if you feel you can't have that open communication, like you're nervous because you're afraid how they'll react, not just that you're uncomfortable, but you're afraid of the way they might react to what you say because you're saying something about them, then you know that's a big red flag right there.
Yeah.
But sometimes if you can communicate with them and they're like, oh, I was unaware that I was doing that, oh, and they're able to change the behavior, awesome. If they're not, and they just
Yes.
continually go past your boundaries, and you've communicated and you've tried those things, maybe this is not the relationship for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you were talking about how he was always over your shoulder and who you talking to and who you're flirting with and all of that. So for me that, and I don't know a lot of terminology around this type of behavior, but it feels like there's some isolation
Mhm.
that's trying to happen. So can you just maybe give some yellow flags, red flags for what that type of behavior is when somebody is real subtle, real slick on trying to isolate somebody? What could that look like?
So it's definitely in the beginning, it's kind of almost, you feel kind of complimented because they're like, I never want to be apart from you, basically. And it's not they don't want to be apart from you, it's that when you're apart from them, they are wondering what other information you're getting. That you possibly, like, someone's going to give you another opinion that's not the one that they want you to have.
Mm,
That the people want to control your thoughts. They want you to think how they want you to think. And so if you have connections with people outside of them, they're afraid that you might not get their message strong enough, because there's other people saying that doesn't sound right, or maybe you shouldn't be in a relationship with this person. That's why they try to isolate you, so all you're hearing is the messages from them and the opinions from them. Other thing
wow.
is the extreme jealousy. At first, when you're like in a relationship, someone's like, oh, who's that guy? That's normal. Especially depending on your age, jealousy is a little bit higher on that thing. But
Mhm.
when it's like you can't even talk to the waiter because he's male in the restaurant because you're flirting with them. Or,
Mm,
I know in my relationship, it was my son. I had a grown son at that point in time, and I would talk to him because he was at college. And why are you talking to him for so long? What's going on? I'm like, it's my kid, like my firstborn. I miss him. And so it goes to that extreme level where you can't, you're not functioning, and so you're always anxious because if you like look at someone in the eye, or you make a conversation, or you smile, there's going to be consequences. And so you start feeling that anxiousness and this nervousness around the person because you almost can never get anything right, is another thing. um, you're walking on eggshells. You're trying to do everything right, not and there's no conflict, or no healthy conflict, which relationships need. The communication
mhm.
and working out problems that way, it
Yes.
doesn't exist because it's just one-sided. It's their opinion. That's all that counts in the relationship. So
Wow. And so with this isolation type behavior, uh, and I never thought it, I didn't think that through with, they just don't want somebody else in your ear saying what's probably the truth, right?
exactly. Right.
So that's really calculating on their part. I mean, the whole thing is everything is calculating.
It is.
And
I always
so,
say that there's like a little book that they must all have because they do the same kind of steps, like get you away from everybody you love. They always come up with things. I remember I'd have visits scheduled to go see my family, and he'd come up with some grandiose plan, and he'd be like, I was going to surprise you. I can't waste all this money. And it would guilt me into like staying because I was like, oh, geez, I don't want to upset him, kind of thing. And it just came down to like within 6 months, I just stopped asking to go places. It was harder to do.
wow.
I was completely isolated, even for my family, which was, I'm
Yeah.
a big family person. So they calculate that just right, and they make you feel like it's love, but what it really is manipulation and power and control over you.
Right. Right. And so did you find yourself apologizing a lot? Because
I I found myself holding my tongue a lot,
okay.
and not saying what I wanted to say. I think that's what got me in trouble the first time he assaulted me. It was like, what are you talking about? I was one of those people who challenged him, and he didn't, like, he liked it in a way, in the business way, but he didn't really like it in the authority that he's the man of the castle kind of thing. Uh,
Mm,
so I learned, you learn not to, you don't want that same thing to happen again. So you're like, okay, don't say anything. When he would be in a fit and rage, and there would be an assault, I didn't cry. I didn't say stop. I knew that those things would just antagonize him and make him do more. And so I learned really quickly, like, what you do say and what you don't say, and how, but I found myself holding my tongue, and I'm not one of those people who doesn't express what I want, how I'm feeling. And so
wow.
a lot of inside feelings, you want to just say, I feel like crap all the time. I feel like anxiety. I'm nervous all the time. Just wondering what your next thing's going to be, or what's going to upset you
Yes.
next or set you off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you couldn't
Yeah.
say that to that person because they're like,
Right.
you don't even know what you're talking about. So again, just
Right.
one-sided conversation.
Right.
So
So I want to go back to, I do agree with a lot of, or everything you're saying, actually, in terms of you have to bite your tongue. Years ago, I was in a physically abusive, emotionally abusive relationship as well. And it is definitely walking on eggshells. There's no other way to word it. But I want to go back to before it gets to that point where you're figuring out, is this an okay relationship or not? What could you give our viewers, maybe some language, some phrases, something that maybe they could use at toward the beginning when they start noticing these yellow red flags? How could they broach that conversation? What could they say in the very beginning when they first start noticing things to try to figure out, am I staying or am I going?
right. Yeah, a lot of it is just how you approach that person. So have a calm mind, or a calm demeanor is one thing. Like, just the advice there is, they're not going to be on the defensive. If you come yelling and screaming something, most people don't hear what you're saying. So
Yes.
in the very beginning, it's usually this honeymoon stage, and it's a lot easier. People don't reveal their true selves usually very quick, right in the beginning, and so you
Yes.
have that opportunity to test the waters a little bit. And so a lot of it's saying, how using I statements. I feel like this.
Yes.
Being knowing what you're feeling like and why you're feeling like that, and be concise and clear about it. I'm
Yes.
feeling, I feel nervous when, you know, you get upset because I don't answer the phone.
Yeah.
I don't. I don't mean to not answer the phone, but it makes me nervous that that you call me so much during the day and I'm at work and I'm at work and kind of thing. And it's
Mhm.
not saying you're trying not to be accusatory and just but sometimes you have to mention like the actual behavior because some people just will refuse to know that they have any guilt in this or any part of it. But
Correct.
the person in a yellow flag situation where they don't know they're even doing, they'll respond, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even realize I was doing. I definitely won't do that again." Someone says, "Oh, I texted you 50 times one night. I didn't realize that bothered you. Oh my, I'm so sorry. What's
Mhm.
more comfortable for you? Or I really like how the relationship's going, but I think I feel even more comfortable with you if we were able to talk about things that bothered us at the end of the day. Still little things like that, like making it encouraging that you're not ending the relationship, because that's another thing about abusive people is that once they've gotten their hooks in you, they do not want you to see you like already planning your exit. They're kind of like
Yeah.
they're grooming you. But the people who
Yes.
are just innocent in this thing and they're just you see someone they're extra jealous and they kind of make a grumpy about it versus the person who's like demands or gets really angry that you talk to somebody. But you can say, I noticed that you kind of get upset, but when I talk to my friend, Jake or whatever,
Mhm.
yeah, I want to assure you that Jake and I are just friends. Jake's actually, has a boyfriend and we're just really good friends. We've been friends since elementary school. But I don't I feel uncomfortable when when you get upset about things that I've assured you that you can trust me, because a lot of the stuff that you're trying to do and boundaries is build trust. And
Yes.
so you give people something, if they break it, it deteriorates the relationship. If the same situation comes up again and they totally respect your boundaries, it builds trust and a
Mhm.
deeper connection. So,
Mhm.
but I
Mhm.
would just to say to everyone, communicate. People can't read your mind. I always tell my teenage daughter this. He can't read your mind. So he can
Yes.
only react to what he can see happening, and he doesn't know all this backstory that you have going on. So just communicating. And I said, maybe you don't get the exact response you want to have, but sometimes it just makes it feel you. I said you build a connection when you share people how you're feeling. I said then that
Mhm.
leads him to be able to share how he's feeling with you as well. I
Mhm.
said that's the basics of the relationship is having communication, getting to know each other. Um, but yeah, I think I can say if in a relationship, if you doubt that it's going to be come out good when you approach a situation with somebody, it's probably a red flag. If you think it's uncomfortable because I just don't know how to talk about this with somebody, that's more of a yellow flag. You're
Right.
not afraid of them. You're just nervous, like anybody's nervous when they have to like say something that they don't want to say in an uncomfortable situation. But it's also well worth it thinking if I'm able to do this, I'll be less anxious. There'll be less stress in the relationship. And
Mhm.
overall, I feel like I'm connected to that person more.
Mhm.
So there's a kind of a benefit if you can just have that little conversation, break into it. And it doesn't have to be accusatory. It just can be, I just feel uncomfortable when something like this happens. I know
Right.
that I did that with a guy I was recently dating and said, it makes me uncomfortable that you're always asking, you ask a lot about who my ex-husband. I said I don't know, I don't know how to answer it correctly because you always seem to get upset no matter what I say. And
Mhm.
I tried to, I was like, I don't know how to, I had to kind of say exactly what he was doing because it was like this is the behavior I want to have changed. And so he was actually responsive in a good way. He was like, wow, I didn't realize that. Hey, I was just making conversation. I said, oh, it just feels like, you're kind of like accusing me of something when I'm just, I have two kids with this man, so I still communicate with him. And so
Right.
it turned out okay. But at first I was like, God, how do I say this to him? Like, how do I say he's making me uncomfortable every time he brings this up? So,
Yes.
um,
Yes. Well, and I like that you're saying sometimes it is truly just somebody isn't aware of how they're coming across.
but
So, and that's 100% correct. So, I do also want to say, and I know that you would agree 1,000%, because some of our audience, we have men who also watch or listen.
right.
And I know for a fact that this has happened to men too, because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yep.
And it doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship.
No. No, definitely. It's
So,
friends, friendships. I think boundaries, you can start those early with friends. That thing about saying no sometimes people are overcommitted. One of those first boundaries is a no boundary. No, I'm not going to overcommit myself. If you're one of those people pleasing kind of, persons, because it ends up, just deteriorating yourself when you're doing those
Right.
things and you're the one who's weighing on. But being able to say no, even to a friend, like, no, I can't go this time because I've been gone all week and da da da. Instead of just saying, oh, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do this, because that's kind of where you fall into the bad habits. If you don't actually express what you're feeling to those you
Yeah.
care about and those people you spend time with, then you're going to have those, the bad feelings that you're having to like swallow because you weren't able just to, let the person know how
Right.
you're feeling. But yeah,
Right.
and then the statistic is 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience violence sometime in their
Wow.
life, by an
Yeah.
intimate partner. So
Yes.
it's only a 1 in 3 versus 1 in 4, and I've seen it a couple times, especially with men, and I feel bad because men, have this extra thing that they have to deal with. Like I'm a manly, I'm masculine, I don't cry, I don't have feelings. But the truth is, they're human.
Right.
So, so if someone comes to you and they're in a bad relationship and they happen to be male, listen to them and respect it. That it's hard for them to come forward to you or
Oh,
share that information.
sure. Yeah, because they are a lot of times ego driven, and for them to admit maybe they're being hit at home,
Right,
or they've got, the romantic partner who's blowing up their phone, or, well, why haven't we talked 5 times today, and that kind of
right.
thing.
Oh,
So,
definitely.
and it can be relatives as well. So I've seen that.
Yes.
So anyhow, all right, before we close out, are there any other tips on communication that you can give our audience?
I This is kind of communicating with yourself versus communicating is listen to your body. Get to know what your body feels like when you're angry, when you're sad, when you're happy. Feel those cues so that when it's trying to tell you something in a dangerous situation or something,
Right.
you can take that pause, because whenever you feel that one thing that that reaction, take a pause, and it's for your own safety. It's
Yes.
for you. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Okay, I
internal
love
communication.
everything you said, and this is such a huge, huge topic and a huge concern in our society, probably around the world, honestly.
Oh yeah,
So I just love that you are calling attention to it because it is desperately needed. It's just everywhere you look, you can see this type of behavior on a spectrum. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's massive,
right.
but it's just behavior that I think our society is becoming far more narcissistic and sociopathic
Yeah.
and all of the things, all of the icks.
Yes.
So,
Exactly. I agree.
so anyhow, yeah, we have to protect ourselves. We have to advocate for ourselves. We
Right.
we have to. So, all right, Meg, do you have anything that you want to share with our audience in terms of, do you have an offer? Do you have a website? Do you have what do you have for our audience?
I do. I have also all different sorts of social media. My Instagram, Facebook accounts, and TikTok are all Dating Tips by Meg.
Okay.
And I have a website that's also datingtipsbymeg.com. If you want to get in contact me, if you have a group that you think it'd be great to talk to and share the information, raise awareness, I'm always open to doing these talks with anybody, any type of group, an all male group, all girls. Uh, but yeah, reach out. You can DM me, you can email me. If you go to my website, it has all the different contacts and ways to get a hold of me as well.
And so would you say that you do not only live events, but would you also do virtual events?
Definitely, yes. Some of the coaching I've been able to do or consulting has been over the internet because not everyone lives in where I live in my little podunk town. So in order to connect and be financially stable, sometimes you have to that you take advantage of the technology that we do have. So
Yes. Okay.
definitely.
Okay. I truly, again, just thank you. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Of course.
And, it's February, and February is the love month. And again, when I saw the name of your company, I was like, I wonder if she'll be on my podcast in February.
Oh, nice.
So I'm just so glad that you came on and that you are highlighting this very real, significant issue for people. So, Meg,
Thank,
thank you so much.
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a good conversation.
Yes, it was. It was. All right. I look forward to more conversations with you.
Sounds good.
All
Thank you,
right.
everyone. All right.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.